Hey, and we're live. Good to see everybody. We're here for the this is the May book, right? Or is it the June book? It's the May book. Yeah, it's the May book because no, I always get confused because I've got like 3 months of them in my head. Here for the May book for the kids club. We have Bird Boy by Anne Szabla, right? Szabla. There we go. I got it. Beautiful book, great book. Really loved it a lot. What did you think? Yeah. Yeah? Yeah. No, that's a lot of noise. Gotta do more noise. Gotta make more noise. Sort of okay. All right. Yeah, but it's great. But it's. Yeah, you want to see the next one? Awesome. That's the right response to have. Yeah. I thought this was great, and I love your art through this, Annie. I guess maybe the place to start is this is such an evocative and an original world. Where did the world come from?
Pretty much it came from just every sort of little thing that I've sort of seen or studied over the years, and I just sort of pulled it all together into my own world just because I loved it all so much. A little bit of sort of Pacific Northwest Native American, a little bit of Mayan, a little bit of just like African culture, and just threw it all together in a pot and just wanted to see what happens when it came out. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it came out really well. What's your process of working? Do you work? Is everything pen and ink? Do you work digitally? How do you work?
Everything is digital. I mean, I'll go over a little bit. I brought in my little presentation. Basically, I sort of start just writing kind of novel style, just little scenes. And then I'll take those scenes and I'll put them in a big sheet that has all of my thumbnails on it so that I can see the entire story at once. And then from there, I'll take each page and sort of work it up from that thumbnail to pencils and inks and all digital pencils and digital inks and everything like that until I get the final page.
Okay. Are you working on a tablet then?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
With a digital pen?
Yep.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. I have a tablet. I have a little tablet here, which I brought with me so that I can work just wherever I am. But then I also have back home like a larger sort of professional style computer with a tablet attached. And that's been really helpful.
Nice.
Stuff done. Yeah.
Nice, very nice. Ben, did you have
a
immediate question?
Yeah, I was gonna say I really love the art style, and the coloring, just all of the art and the writing as well. I just really like this a lot.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was a comment though, not a question. I want to say hi to everybody out there on the internet too, and remind you guys, if you're watching this stream, you can ask questions, and we will ask them of Annie for you. And we're going to go right now to our first one, who is this from Luca? Is that what that says? Luca, okay. And Luca says, where did the character Bird Boy come from? Which by which I think he means Bali. So where did Bali come from?
Bali was, I guess, another just random invention. I was in a character design class in college. It was my final semester, my senior year, and the teacher, our very first assignment was, just surprise me, do something weird. And so I started doodling this little kid, and he had this weird bird mask, and I kept doodling him over and over. And I was like, there's something about this little kid. Like, I want to see him do something. I don't just want to draw him once. And that sort of was the very beginning of where he came from.
Is it harder or easier to draw characters without a lot of facial expressions? Do you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of cartooning is about sort of that expressive emotion on the face, and you kind of locked yourself out of that tool to a certain extent.
Right.
With this? Was that a conscious decision, or?
Yes and no. I mean, it's. In some ways, it's easier because I don't have to think about drawing a face every, 2 panels or so. But really, I just take that expression that was going to be in the face and I transfer it to the entire body, or more so to the entire scene. So, if somebody's scared, then the entire scene sort of closes in around them. If somebody's happy, then, the entire scene is happy. And I've sort of used that to kind of learn how to take an emotion and bring it across the entire, I guess, just the whole book.
Makes sense to me. Guys, you guys got any immediate questions? Yeah, here, let me bring it up.
The one character that I've been wondering, like the characters that I've been wondering how they came about is the Rookmen. I don't know. I thought that they were cool.
Rookmen were another character that I sort of, all of the characters that I came up with in the story sort of started out during these classes I was taking where the teachers would just say, you know, oh, do something based on this, do something based on that. And so it was one day, wasn't even an art class, it was a class on, I think it was African art and culture, and there was a mask, and it was really interesting, like entirely black painted mask, and the face was all sort of squished down around it. And I was just like, I want to do something with this mask. And so that was, it had this top part of the mask was this like big, tall kind of triangle thing. And that sort of became the top of the Rookmen's sort of hat, I guess. And just from there, I just kind of said, oh, what's the most kind of scary looking, but also cool looking thing that I could do? And it just sort of, I guess, appeared from my mind from there.
The Rookmen, or at least one of them, seemed like they didn't have a head, or there's a key. I wasn't quite sure what that was on the inside of their of the head. Is that, are they all like that, or will we find out later as the series goes on, or
You'll find out a lot more later about the Rookmen. I will say they are all sort of different inside. They're not quite people, so they've got some surprises inside. They're kind of like the Kinder eggs of characters.
dirt eggs? That's great. That's great. Do we have another? You got one?
Oh yeah. Well, I just wanted to know if there's any specific idea that gave you, or that what gave you the idea to make the automatopoeias, the sound effects, like more written out, not just kind of tiny.
I don't know. It just seemed right with the kind of with the style of the story to have them sort of match that a little bit more. I've always been more visual than a writer. I guess I went to art school. I didn't go to writing school. So a lot of what I do, I try to do through visuals. So when there's a sound effect and it's like a boom or something, it has to look like a boom too. So I thought that was important when I sort of started working on it.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and I majored in illustration, which is really kind of everything. So finding my way into comics was sort of my own path, not directly related to school, which has always been kind of the way where I'll have my professional path, and then I'll have comics, and comics has always been sort of on the side, but it's been kind of growing in size and becoming more important and a larger part of my life every year. So it's been interesting.
How did the book come about, like from being published? Did you send out proposals and?
I was sort of in the right place at the right time. It started out as a web comic, and I never really meant to have it published anywhere. I mean, I always sort of would set up my pages as if someday I would publish it maybe, or self-publish it. But then I was at a illustration workshop called the Illustration Masterclass, and that's up in Amherst, Massachusetts. I'm actually going back next week because it's a yearly thing. And one of the Dark Horse editors, Scott Alley, was there, and I didn't even know he was going to be there, or else I would have actually prepared something. But I had no idea he was going to be there, and I was writing on Twitter or something like, oh, I'm at IMC, this is great, like we're having a great time. He apparently was on Twitter too, saw that, and then like I was just hanging out in one of the classrooms, and he came up to me, and I had no idea who he was, and he was like, hey. And I was like, hey, random person. And he was like, I followed you on Twitter. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine, I guess. And then I was like, okay, that was weird. So I go back to my desk and I look like who followed me on Twitter, because I hadn't been looking because I was busy at this class the whole time. And then it was like, oh, Scott Alley, like, you know, the editor-in-chief of Dark Horse. And I was like, whoa, shoot, like I should have been cooler. But he was, I guess, really interested in the book, and we started talking about it during the class, and he was like, yeah, when you're finished with the book, let us know and we'll publish it. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then I was like, oh shoot, I better work on this book a lot faster, because I had been, picking at it for the last, 3 to 5 years at that point. So that was sort of the story.
Wow, that's great that like you kind of fell into it backwards in a way. Did you have to rework it a lot from going from being a web-based thing to being print-based?
Not a lot. I mean, I always say that past Annie has my back, because I'll plan for it, just like in case something were to happen, in case maybe I'll hit it big someday, just in case. So I had the pages, the right size, and I had everything sort of set up. I had to do a little bit of changing the writing around, adding a little bit more text in there, because originally it was very, very silent, and we wanted people to be able to actually stick with the book a little bit more. Yeah. So.
Questions from the audience? Yes, in the back, Dave. I'll run to you. Hold on. Here we come.
All right, so I'm pretty sure everybody agrees that the illustrations were just beautiful in the book. But so you were talking about your digital art process. What program are you using to create your?
Already finished the question.
Oh, that's it. And we've already answered the question. Photoshop, that's it.
Yeah.
Two other people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're gonna run. We gotta figure out how that works.
What I'm wondering is, when are you going to make the second book, if it came out yet? Did it?
It is not out yet. I can answer that one.
When are you planning to post it?
The second book will be out in August. It's called Awesome.
For the August book, will we have the second one?
Okay, well, so that's a technical club question. So the answer to that is not no. We can get it for you, but we always offer a brand new volume 1. That's the way the club is set up, so there's always something brand new. Because I would be afraid of someone getting a book that they're reading just the middle of it, like if it's their first book, But we'll definitely let you guys know when the second one comes out. And that's pretty cool that you're already like looking forward to it.
Also, not necessarily issue 1. I mean, usually, but mostly just like one book to a series.
Yeah, right,
It's
right.
like a book where each one is
Exactly, because we don't want to. I mean, part of the point is to get as many things out there as possible to you guys, and that. Yes.
I have one more question, and sorry, it's a bit off the subject. On Delia Dirk, when I started reading it, I realized that wasn't the first book. There were books before it.
You're right about that one. Good eye. That was it. Every once in a while we have to do that, but that book stood alone on its own, so we slightly cheated.
Yeah.
That's it.
Why are the Rookmen called the Rookmen?
A rook is a kind of a sort of black bird, and it's sort of kind of like a crow, kind of has connotations of being dark or foreboding. And so I kind of took that, and when I created the Rookmen, they were kind of bird-like to sort of match Bali's hat and to keep everything in the bird theme. So that's why I decided to go with that name.
That's all the question.
I know you studied art, but did you also study anthropology or anything? It seems like you have a real interest in other cultures.
A little bit. I took a bunch of art history classes that were very focused on sort of indigenous cultures. There were classes on African art, classes on sort of the Pacific coast, things like that. And that's sort of where I got a lot of that. Before then, I guess when I was much younger, my mom would read me stories. And for some reason, all these stories were sort of Native American stories or world culture stories, just like creation myths and things like that. And so they were always in my head from a very young age. And I just couldn't get them out until I got them out as a book. Yeah.
It's always great to be able to get things out of your head like that too, and do it in a creative way. Yeah, but
So I was just wondering, this might be not something you can answer, but like it might have to be a demo or something. But how did you make it so that you got all the like the sort of reflections on many things, like the torches and a lot of other stuff, kind of like that effect?
I have a bunch of different Photoshop brushes that work in different ways. And when I do put the comic together, I sort of start with the line work, and then I fill in the colors, kind of just like a coloring book. And then on top of that, like on top of all the layers, because everything's sort of layered, so you can work under them or on top of them. On the very top layer, I'll take a really, really soft brush, and I'll just sort of gently splotch it in so that it looks like just reflected light, or just like a pin light on top of something. It's like that.
All right.
well, this might be a good time to go to your presentation. Yeah, makes sense. As we're talking about that.
There we go.
You guys can all see the screen, okay?
Cool.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, so Bird Boy, that's what I'm known for, I guess. Before I started Bird Boy, back when I was in college, and before then, I was always sort of working on different comics. I can make this one a little bigger. So I just wanted to show a couple of some of my earlier stuff. This was a comic I made in senior year of college. And this was just like, I don't know, for some reason I was always working in the comic style as kind of a language. So no matter what I was doing, you know, whether it was working at a job or being in school, I was always sort of making these comics either on the side or working them into my assignments in either one way or another. And this was a comic that I started back in like early high school, and then at some point I said, okay, I'm going to start it again. And so I started again in college. It was called Cialdian, and it was like a medieval fantasy kind of world with all sorts of like weird politics. And I always remember the last panel on this page, which is kind of small there. My teacher at the time, I was doing an independent study with him, because, you know, any chance that I got to do an independent study, I was like, oh, I gotta make more comics. My teacher, I remember this very last panel, he goes, you have to fix that bear. It looks like it's about to attack that guy. And I was like, no, it's just a rug. And he's like, no, it looks like it's going to attack that guy. You got to fix it. But I never actually fixed it. So I didn't listen to my teachers that much. So yeah, I worked on that comic for a while. After that, or sort of during that process when I was working on that comic, outside of school, I was still working on these assignments. And this assignment I did for a comics class in college. And it was sort of the start where I was kind of starting to feel out the world of Bird Boy, even though it didn't have any of the characters in Bird Boy. You can kind of see like these guys are a little bit Rookmen-like. And I was trying to work more with stories that didn't use writing for a lot of the action. I really wanted to try to do more sort of the writing in the visuals. And so this one was a big sort of step towards that. And this was actually the very first time I drew Bali for that character design class. And you could see he was a lot more detailed back then. Just I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted a character that was, you know, all bundled up and had a giant sword. And that's sort of where that came from. But as I started working more and more on the comic, his design got much more simplified and made sort of more out of circles and different shapes so that I could draw him more quickly in the comic. So this is actually, this was a little bit later, and this is an outfit that he actually doesn't wear until like volume 3, but you could see it was much more simplified, much more rounded shapes, which worked a little bit more for him since he's supposed to be so, I guess, cute and innocent. And while I was starting, you know, working on this story in my head, a lot of it was, you know, just drawing random things. Not with any sort of idea what I was going to do with them. I just wanted to draw monsters. That's sort of my big thing. Is I always just want to draw monsters. And a lot of the times I would draw something with no intention of putting it in the story, and then I'd just say, oh, you know, this guy would be great to go, you know, like to get hunted by the hunters, and so then he ends up in the book. So that happened with the Rookmen too. This was one of the earlier drawings, just sort of trying to figure out, where they live and what they look like. For a while, they had like trees on their backs. I don't know. I took that away after a while. And this is something I still do to this day. This is a later character that'll be in probably volume 3. But originally, I was just like, oh, I feel like drawing something random. And so I did. And then I was like, oh, he's kind of cool. He better go in there somewhere. So I'll go back and like rewrite and stick him in there. And same with this guy who comes up a bunch later. And meanwhile, sort of in my professional career, I work as a video game concept artist. So a lot of what I do is I design backgrounds and props and lighting for different video games. And before I got into that, I was always like, oh, I want to draw characters and only characters, and I'm going to draw cool guys with swords. And then, apparently video game companies really need people who design environments and things like that, and like, a chair. And, a chair doesn't sound very exciting, but when you're drawing things for different cultures or, for a certain kind of character, then it becomes a little bit more interesting. And when I was doing this sort of went into Bird Boy a lot, where, I felt like every aspect of that culture kind of needed to be explored, even like, a couch or something. So this was another game that I was working on. These were like, fishermen dwarves or something. And so everything was really nautical and cool. And like, you wouldn't think that drawing a couch is fun, but, I had a lot of fun drawing that couch.
What games have you worked on?
This was for a game called Kingdoms of Amalur, which was actually canceled before it came out. But I've also worked on a bunch of games for the company that makes Rock Band and Dance Central. So this one here was for a game called Fantasia Music Evolved, which was the video game version of Fantasia, which you like swung your arms around and made like music happen, I guess. But they also had these really interesting environments that you could kind of like look through. It was pretty interesting. So.
Why was the game canceled?
It was a bunch of money stuff. They didn't have enough money to finish the game. My friend's coming over to see me. That's Sienna. She's my buddy. Yeah, so while I was working on those sort of props and things, I was like, I have to do something about all these like creatures I'm making, all these props I'm making. So I sat down one day and was just like, oh, I'm gonna make a comic. And something I do a lot is I sort of force myself to start even if I'm not ready. So I made this illustration, and then at the very last second, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna start this comic, and I'm gonna start it in October. So I just wrote October 2010 on it, and I was like, well, I'm sure I'll have enough pages by then to be able to deal with it. So that sort of forced me to start actually making real pages as opposed to just, continue making characters or, like lamps or things like that. So now I'll just go into kind of like, how I make each page, things like that. This is where I kind of start the process. Excuse me. After I'll write like a scene, or I'll write, a couple notes about what I want to happen. And then I'll go into this file, which has just like every page on it all together. And they're super messy because I don't need anybody else to see them. But then I'll just go through and you're supposed to do like all of these at once and write the whole book. But usually I get to I think I got to like page 4 and was like, oh, it's time for me to start. It's time for me to start, making real pages. So it's kind of a back and forth thing where, sometimes I really need to make a finished page, and other times I just want to fiddle around with the story a bunch more.
When you're making these, are you making these sketches like as separate like files, and then they're kind of getting assembled into this big storyboard format that we're looking at, or is it? I'm just wondering about the kind of writing and revising editorial process. Like, is it linear? Is it like, oh, and the next page is going to be like this, or at some point you go, oh wait, no, this has to happen first, and then you have to break it all apart in Photoshop and rearrange it, or separate files, or just curious about process?
There's, for me at least, I don't tend to go back and rewrite, at least very, Sienna, that's the screen. I don't really go back and sort of do a lot of sort of chopping things in. I tend to be very sort of linear, like, here's the page, here's the next page. Occasionally I'll go back, but when I do that, I kind of feel like I have to erase all the pages up to that point and completely redo them. So I try not to ever do that. But it does, sometimes present problems because, sometimes I'll say, oh, I should have made this scene a bit longer or something like that. So I try now, at least with, excuse me, with books 2 and 3, like, I'll try to plan ahead a little bit more, but I'm still bad where I'll just want to keep going through, and then I'll start making pages before I actually have the scene finished. And so I'm kind of a mess, but all of these pages, like I lay them all out. I have a file that's just like a bunch of blank squares, and I'll just go through each one, and I'll have my script next to me, or part of a script, or like a napkin that I wrote some notes on, which is what happens a lot. And then I'll just sort of start drawing in each square, and hopefully it'll come out.
Now, when you do thumbnails like that, how many pages are you laying out in a day? Let's say.
Not enough.
Not enough.
Maybe it's like maybe 1 or 2 a day, but this is on top of working, taking care of dogs, and just like making food, which I have to do for myself now because I'm a grown up. But yeah, I'll try to get as many as I can done, especially if I have like a day off or something, then I'll get, maybe like 3 or 4 done. But it is sort of a long process, which is why I like to go back and forth between, finished pages and not, just because otherwise I'll be writing the thing for years and then say, oh, wait, now I actually have to draw the whole thing. Yeah.
Back when the bear was there, what really happened? Why did he drop the sword? Did he do it so he can get back to his base faster? Or why?
He was just scared. It was a big bear. I would have dropped everything too and ran. That's pretty much it. But he after the bear's gone, then he's like, oh shoot, maybe I should have kept that sword, which is why he went back. Yeah. So after I do the sort of thumbnail phase, I take each one of those thumbnails, blow them up, sort of put them into kind of a format that I can put the panels in. After that, I'll start kind of just going through and drawing over them in the next sort of layer up.
That's interesting. I think you're the first person we've spoken to who's literally blowing up their thumbnails. Almost everybody refers to the thumbnails, but redraw, like starts from page 1 at that point. That's interesting. So what advantage do you think that brings you? Well, maybe it's just how you work.
Well, I feel like it's faster because I don't have to, like, sometimes I'll do something in the thumbnail that I really like compositionally, and I don't want to lose that by having to redraw it. So doing that sort of keeps everything where I want it, so I don't have to redo the whole thing. So it's a bit of a speed thing, and just how I'm used to working. Before this, I used to do the same thing where I would start one way and then go to my computer and start again. But this is it makes more sense for me to do it this way. And I can also when I'm not trying to be a speed demon, I actually try to work up the thumbnail a little bit more, kind of so that it's almost like a pre-sketch, so that there's less thinking involved when it comes to the pencil stage. So after I pencil, then I go back in and I do my inking or my digital inking, and this is where I try to do those sort of smooth, sweepy lines that people seem to like, I hope.
Very much so.
And then after that, it just sort of becomes a coloring book for a while, and I can sort of veg out and just, dump colors into sections and like that. So it's very sort of flat coloring at this point. And I used to be very painterly in my previous comics, But I was really looking to go faster, to be able to produce more pages, which kind of backfired on me because these still take a very long time to do. But they're a little bit faster than actually painting up an entire thing because I have a sort of the same process that I do every time. So I did that, and then I just did that 80 more times to get the whole book. And then these are just sort of some sketches from the cover after I was talking with my editor for a while, and we came up with, here's our contract here. We're going to make Bird Boy. Now you have to make a cover. So I'm like, okay, fine. I guess I'll make a cover. And I think the funny thing about editors and art directors in general is if you give them a bunch of sketches, they'll always choose the sketch that you hate the most. So I was really interested. I was like, I'm going to do the second one. It's going to be so cool. The sword is going to be floating in the background. It's going to be great. And then Scott goes, oh, I love the third one. It's going to be awesome. It's got the Rookman floating in the background. And I was like, oh man, not that one. But it kind of works in my favor because then I sort of learn something where I just sort of learn how to take the one that I kind of didn't like the most and make it into one that I'm kind of really interested in. So when I got to the sketch phase, I was like, oh yeah, he was right. This is pretty neat. So that's what I did with that one. And then we just had so much fun. Then there's the finished one. We had so much fun. We decided to start on the next one. So that's the cover for volume 2 that'll be coming out in a couple months. Yeah.
Look like it's already done.
I know, right? Well, actually, volume 2 is already done. It's just waiting to come out. So there you go.
Always takes a little time to print. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
How many volumes do you project?
6 volumes.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so
6. That's pretty cool, huh?
we'll be around for a while.
Nice. Nice.
That is the plan.
Nice.
After you finish the Bird Boy series, are you planning on making any new series, or are you making a new series?
I am both planning new series and working on new series. And there's always things in the back of my head that I want to work on. I feel like there's always going to be books that I maybe won't have time to make, but I just have to at least start or at least plan for. So there's always things that are coming up. I do have one story that I've just started working on actual pages for, so that'll be coming up. And that's sort of a kind of celestial kind of angels and demons kind of thing that's eventually going to happen someday, maybe.
Are they going to be books that kids can read as well, or?
Probably. I do enjoy making books for kids, or at least books that aren't, super gory or super, weird. Just because that's the kind of book that I like to read, even though I'm not a kid anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of still am, maybe, sometimes.
And is the plan for them to come out twice a year? Is that how it's expected to work? Or?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I still have to finish volume 3, which is going to take a little while. So we probably won't see that one quite as fast as volume 2, but probably sometime next year, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a question, Ben?
Yeah. Two questions regarding the tablet. Do you find it easier to work with because I assume you use some sort of stylus or something? Do you find that easier than working with pen and paper, or is it just about the same?
At this point, working on the tablet is easier just because I've been doing it for years and years. Working on pen and paper, I tend to work very differently. So it's kind of a different style at this point. But when I do sort of write, I do most of my writing on paper, which is very strange since you could type stuff. But I prefer to write sort of in a book. I have my book here. So when I start a volume, it's sort of just like a big old mess. And then I'll occasionally throw a doodle in there or something, but it's mostly when I go onto paper, I just make a mess. It's just how it is. And then when I want to clean stuff up, that's when the tablet comes in. Yeah.
I think I sort of know the answer to this question, but I have to ask it anyways. On projects which do not come to completion, like that video that you mentioned, do you retain your artwork, or does the company retain the artwork?
Because I'm an employee at that company, they technically own everything that I draw when I'm in their studio. So yeah, they'll give me the rights to put it in a portfolio or things like that. Or if there is a project that comes out completely, then I get to, put that in my portfolio. But it's technically still their art and they own it all. So that's why every once in a while they'll say, "Oh, we should make a Bird Boy game," and I'm like, "Not unless you want a Bird Boy contract." So yeah.
It's Dark Horse is good to work with, yeah, in terms of keeping all your rights and control over everything. Yeah. Good creator-owned company. Another question.
I'm just curious. So do you ever find yourself working at your job and wanting to put one of those characters in there, but going, "Oh, I can't do that," or like the other way around, like, this character is perfect. Oh no, wait a minute. That looks too much like the one from the game. That's a work for hire.
Yeah, that sort of thing happens all the time. More so, I'll create a character for the company and I'll go, "Oh shoot, that character's too good for them. I want this character for me." So what ends up happening if I do that is, I'll make a character that's similar but far enough apart. And with concept art, so many things don't make it to a final game that it's not really much of an issue if I end up having a character that's similar but not quite the same as a character that they'll never end up using. So I don't know.
All right. Any other questions from the kids? Guys, no? Oh, in the back.
Okay, I noticed that bear had like that interesting mask on it. Inspired by it, it's kind of like a fountain pen tip.
It was inspired by a fountain pen tip, so that's why.
Good eye, good eye. Good eye.
So, I just completely forgot my question.
Excellent.
Oh, I love it.
It seemed like the bear was filled with, one of the things that they were hunting was filled with rocks. Why? Why are they hunting it if it's filled with rocks? What do they eat?
So actually, they were originally hunting those stick deer things, which hopefully are filled with some sort of meat. Otherwise, they'll be in trouble. They don't really ever want to be hunting something like a bear because it's horrible and angry. B, because they can't really get anything from it. So that's why they tend to stay away from the creatures that are inside of the forest, just because they can't really do anything with them. And because they're, super, super dangerous. Yeah, except for squirrels and things, which are cute and adorable. But, yeah. Because why not?
Some of the imagery in the book has a very kind of dreamlike quality. Is that coming from your dreams? Is it something like a belly full of rocks? Just seems like a dream idea.
Yeah, it's all supposed to be kind of like that. They're not my dreams because my dreams tend to be boring. Right. But they are supposed to, the creatures and the environments. I was really trying to get away from a more realistic story. I wanted a story where, things would change or things would happen that you really didn't expect. So a lot of the times you get creatures that, are either not what you expect on the inside, or they'll become something very different, or they'll start out mean and then be nice, or start out nice and then be mean. Just because that's sort of the nature of dreams where, you'll start out in a dream and it'll be day, and then, you might turn around and suddenly it's night. Things like that have always really interested me. So that's why they're there.
The other thing I liked was the use of sound as a way of getting rid of monsters. Can you talk about that at all?
I guess so. it actually is interesting. I was reading some book, one of the Joseph Campbell books. Joseph Campbell wrote a book called Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is where a lot of my sort of the inspiration for the flow of the story came from. He came up with this sort of theory that all heroes have the same or very similar journeys, where they start out in one situation and then they go through their entire journey. But what I found interesting in reading those books by him wasn't so much the hero's journey as he kind of went into different cultures and different cultures' myths. And he was talking about one culture where there was the idea of a sword, and the sword would represent sort of male energy, and the bell, which would represent female energy, and just sort of using those together. And I thought that was really interesting, and that's sort of where the bell came from. And they just have very different, the sword is sort of like a physical power kind of thing. The bell is kind of like a magical power kind of thing. And just sort of was like, that's pretty cool. So I'll stick that in there too. Yeah.
Oh, that's very nice. The other thing that I found very effective was the Rookman's balloons and how they kind of wind around, and it makes me think that they're kind of talk like this, right? And it's implied in the artwork. That's got to be a conscious decision as well of how to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I always like to play with sort of what's actually physically in the comic and what is sort of a comic tool. And I do that a lot with word bubbles, where, like I've done stories where, character will just like reach up and grab a bubble and be like, oh, I got it, here it is. Or like, they'll start talking and the bubble won't disappear. So then suddenly there's like all these bubbles in the same panel. Like, what do you do? And I just like to play with the idea that, sometimes character will speak and that'll be like a smoky kind of voice, like a Voldemort voice, and just see how I can draw that, since, the one, I guess, thing about comics that you don't have is sound. And so how do you draw sound? And that's always been something I've been thinking about.
That makes sense to me.
I noticed that there's some things like the I don't know, the key thing inside the Rookman seemed to be, it had speech bubbles with little pictures in it. What are those exactly?
Kind of pictograms.
Yeah, those, I don't want to spoil too much, so I guess it'll come up later, I should say. You'll learn about it more later. But the Rookmen weren't always the Rookmen, and so there are things inside of them that are kind of older and more, I guess, evil. And those things don't necessarily speak with words, and so they'll speak with, a pictogram or, just an image. And that sort of goes back to, thinking about how to illustrate, different kinds of speech. And, if you have a speech bubble, it doesn't always have to be text. It can be an image. And I sort of thought that was an interesting way to sort of depict something strange going on that you might learn more about going forward.
I've always wondered this with world building, when you're doing a project that, you haven't written out the whole thing from beginning to end yet. How much of, say, the Rookman have you worked all the way out in your head, and how much is like, well, I know up to this point, but then there's this big question mark that I haven't figured out yet?
I know most of what's going on with the Rookmen. Occasionally what will happen is, I'll put in what I know, and then I might, accidentally draw something weird, and then I'll be like, oh, I'm going to keep that in there. And then that'll become something that I'll have to sort of explain to myself later, and then eventually explain to the readers down the line.
Yeah. Keeps it fresh and fun, too.
Yeah, exactly. Keeps it fun for me to write and fun for other people to read, because, I don't know what's going on, so I guess nobody else does either, which can be interesting when you finally figure out what it is.
Very good. So last call for questions from the internet, and I know there's one over here, but I just wanted to sort of make a point that if you guys have any, like, we're almost out of time here, and I'm going to run the mic back. Whoa. No, it's okay.
When the main character puts a stone in to pop it, then it starts pouring out fire. What was your idea for that? What was he actually gonna do?
Yeah, we gotta have 2 mics. This is silly.
Get your exercise. That was a special kind of stone. I had this idea that you could use different stones and combine them with different things to sort of make different, I guess, effects. So it was a special stone. When Bali was sort of collecting things from Inani's house, he reached into a basket and there were a bunch of those stones. And so the idea was, fire is sort of made by taking one of these stones, and the stone had a special rune on it, and you plop the stone into water, and it just makes either hot water, or you pour it out and it makes fire. And it was just sort of an interesting kind of different way to do something which would normally be like, oh, Bali rubs 2 sticks together, kind of boring. Oh, Bali does this weird fire thing, kind of interesting. So yeah.
Very good. Anything else from the room? No? All right. You got anything, Ben?
Yeah, I'm just gonna reiterate how much I like the art and color.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah, no, I think your line work is terrific, and I just it's intricate, but it's not fussy, and I love it. And that's why we picked it for the club. So everybody loved the book, right? Yeah. Cool. I'm really glad to hear. Let's thank Annie for coming out here and talking to us. She's going to stick around for a little while and sign your books for you guys if you want. Next month's book is Poppy and the Lost Lagoon by Matt Kint and Brian Hurt. That comes out, I want to say, next week, right? That's what I said. Yeah, on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, you can come back and get the next graphic novel. And we'll have a meeting. The next meeting is going to be on video, unfortunately. But yeah, thanks for coming out, and really great to have you all. And we'll see you all next time. Bye.